Good morning, everybody. It's Merritt with Master of One Coaching, and I'm so pleased to be here today on this beautiful Friday morning, spring morning here in the Northeast. It is just a glorious, glorious week it's been for spring here after a long and kind of arduous winter. So I'm very pleased that it is so beautiful today. And I'm coming to you today actually a little bit off the cuff because first of all, you might notice I'm in my bedroom, which is unusual for me, but I'm very excited to share you. Some of you may have seen that I am actually in the process of, in the last couple of stages of building my office, which is happening beneath my feet. So I'm working with an amazing designer, Keely Sheehan, who is out there. She is just starting a design studio called Full of Grace. So go check her out. Amazing designer. And she's been such a joy to work with. So she's helping me with that and making my vision come to life. And also working with a wonderful contractor named Clark, who has just been a joy. And so that's happening. And it's magically happening downstairs beneath my feet. Should be done in a couple of weeks. And I will come to you from there. So I'm super excited. At any rate, that actually ties into my topic today as well. But the other thing I wanted to let you know is that this is a little bit off the cuff too, because I had somebody scheduled for today, and he unfortunately, and I'm not going to disclose who it is, but he's unfortunately is dealing with some complications related to COVID and has been in the hospital for the last few days. So we're going to send some good juju out to him, and hopefully he will come back and join us in a few weeks, all better and ready to go. So good energy and healing out to him. At any rate, I thought it was a great opportunity to come to you today and talk to you about intuition. This is something that has been on my mind quite a lot lately. And I have found that, well, what's really happened actually the last couple of weeks is that I have been wondering where my intuition has playing a role in my own leadership and in my own business. And I've been thinking kind of to myself that maybe I would like to find somebody who would help me reconnect with that. I have had moments in my life, periods of time in my life where I felt very connected to my intuition and felt like I was very directed and guided by that sense of inner knowing, and also by my highest self helping me make decisions and really know what was the right direction for me in any given moment. Lately, I felt like that's been a little muddled, and I think partly it has to do with just feeling like I have a lot of decisions to make, and they feel very grounded, very earthly, if that makes sense. They feel like I have to be very practical in my decisions and like, what is the next practical move? And there's a lot of sort of tactical approaches there, and thinking of other people, and it just feels very like earthly, if that makes sense. So I would love to see those of you who are here with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining today. Where has intuition played a role for you in your life? I would love to see one or two comments up there about intuition in terms of how it's played a role in your life. And I'm going to ask more questions about that in a minute, but if we could start off with that energy, that would be great, because I would love to know how this plays out for you. I would like to say a couple of things. There's been moments, some of those moments in my life that I have connected to intuition have been moments where it seemed like things were kind of blown wide open, if that makes sense. So I'll cite specifically, well, major changes and transition phases. So I remember once, right before I went to college when I was 17 years old, and not really sure, or worried about where I was going to go to school. If I really wanted to go to NYU, that was like my dream choice at the time. Was that going to happen for me? And I remember just this moment of being in my aunt's house and being completely overcome with this peace of like, oh my gosh, it's all going to be okay. It's all happening the way I hope it's going to happen. And it just like really calmed me down. And I've had other moments in my life like that too. Like when my dearly departed first husband, Peter, when he transitioned, I remember having this, what felt like this just floodgates of intuition and downloads, right? If you are familiar with that expression, downloads from spirit or God or the universe, or however you want to contextualize that, of just like what the next steps need to be and where I need to be going next and how I could proceed in the midst of grief, in the midst of upheaval, and of the chaos of just raising 3 small children, right? So that was a moment in time for a period of about a year where I felt so connected to my intuition. I could anticipate when people were going to call me, and who they were going to be, and then they would call. I could anticipate the next steps, whether I was going to I was moving. I was needing to move I was living in Buffalo, and I wanted to move down here to the Hudson Valley. How I was going to make that choice, what town was I going to live in, what the house I was going to buy, all of these things, it just felt very much like I was guided through it. Like I really wasn't making the decisions for myself, but I was sort of being just directed in some way. So again, I would love if you have, those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about intuition in terms of leadership, how we're connected to it, when we aren't so connected to it, and how that plays out in our life and in leadership. So if you want to join us in the conversation and just put up a comment or two, just say 1 or 2 comments about how that has played a role in your life and in your leadership, I would love that. This morning, when I was thinking about this topic, I came across an article from Forbes, which I put in the post earlier, and it summed up the idea that we are trained, I think especially people who are my generation and older, trained to separate work and life, right? Where leave your emotions at the door, leave your stuff at the door and don't bring it in. And that really actually is not possible. This is a lot of what I work with my clients on. It's not possible to do that. We can compartmentalize to a point. That's true. Some of us more than others. But at the end of the day, we are bringing our whole selves into a room, whether we like it or not, whether we're aware of it or not. And that really is the key difference, if we have awareness of it or not. So what happens if, rather than trying to and ultimately failing to bifurcate our personalities, bifurcate our emotional selves, pardon the air quotes, but right, separate ourselves and leave it at the door. What happens if we embrace some of that and bring it in to the room with us? I was talking to a client this morning about a decision that he has to make, a professional decision that is also connected with his personal life as well, and his personal his soul work that he is working to pursue and complete. And he was saying that he felt like his work brain was being engaged in a way that it felt like he could definitely do the work of his work brain. He could definitely come to that table with those skills, but there was something in him that was angry about it. And he just couldn't get at the center of what that was about. And so how does that affect the work that we do? If we know we can come in and do something, but we're angry about it, what kind of energy does that bring to the work that we're doing, to the other people we're doing it with, right? So, and this client is clever and intuitive to know that he needed to work through that and get to the essence of it. And we did that. And so there's an example of where he's bringing his intuitive self to, even if he couldn't put his finger on it right away, he was very willing and happy to do the work to figure it out. So what happens when we bring our whole self? What happens when we bring the mess? Now, I'm not saying that we need to bring our whole mess, right? If you are in need of putting yourself into some sort of safe container, by all means do that. You don't want to come in frayed and like an open wound into any given situation if you can help it, unless you are seeking specific help for that. But what happens if we say, okay, I'm going to bring my whole self to this conversation. I'm going to bring my whole soul to this conversation, and I'm going to listen to my intuition and really trust and act upon it in a way that I feel has integrity and responsibility, because that's ultimately why people ask us in the room. It's not necessarily because of our skill set or our resume. It's an energy that they get from us, whether we're aware of it or not, right? It's an energy that we get from each other when we're hired to do a job or when we hire somebody else to do a job. I love this. Trish, thank you for throwing this in there. She says, what do you suggest for someone who's having a hard time understanding everything in their new job? Can I hire you? Absolutely, you can hire me, Trish, and we can talk about that for sure. Let me speak to that for a second. What do you suggest for someone who is having a hard time understanding everything in their new job? So that's kind of a broad stroke, right? Everything in your new job. What do you mean specifically about everything? Can you give me a starting point there, Trish? Because is it about environment? Is it about context? Is it about retaining information? Is it about relationship? Do you think, if I ask you, so this is a good point for you to use your intuition, Trish. If I ask you to answer the question, what's the starting point for that conversation of that everything? What is the thing that rises to the top for you as most important to understand first? What does come to mind for you? It's retaining information. Okay, that's really interesting. So that's great to know. If it's retaining the information, there could be a couple things in play. Certainly, we want to look at the physiological and physical aspects of it first, right? Are you in a situation where are you taking care of yourself, right? Is your nutrition supporting you? Are you sleeping well enough? Those kind of basic human things, right? Is your system working in a way that feels like you have an old brain? Well, old brains can retain information too. So, but that would be the first step I would look at is, if you want to look at how you're taking care of yourself, if you might want to talk to a health provider, however that, whether it's a medical doctor or a naturopath or an herbalist or whatever that means to you, to go and make sure that your body and your brain are being supported just sort of really on the physical level. Then the next thing I would ask you, Trish, would be to look at where are you resisting, and what is the resistance within you for retaining the information. So once we get past that physical test, right? Are you resisting because you feel like you don't belong? Are you resisting because you feel like it's just too much? Is it the right fit? Is it not the right fit? Are you resisting because of sort of the topic or the work at hand? Those are the sort of the next level questions. And that is a great place for your intuition to start taking hold as well. Here's the thing about intuition and the subconscious. So, and they are not sleeping well because I've been so stressed. I have major ADD. So there you go. That's a great, and then when you're not sleeping well, then you get more stressed, then you're not sleeping well, right? So I would suggest, and I'm not a medical doctor, right? I'm not a practitioner or a healer, but I would suggest first, Trish, reaching out to somebody who can take a look at your physical system and see how you can right that ship first. And then, yes, not at all. Yeah, not at least, right? Not she said she's not resisting at all, at least not consciously. There could be some subconscious resistance, which I was going to get to in a minute. But first step is to reach out to somebody who can help you balance or rebalance your physical system. And then the next steps would be to talk about resistance and whether it's conscious or not. So let's talk about resistance specifically as it has to do with intuition and subconscious. They're distinct, right? Distinct is between the two of them. They're two separate systems, but they are related and connected. So the subconscious, or rather unconscious system, is the operating system that runs our mental and psychic, if you will, or psychological, not psychic, psychological systems that keep the brain making decisions in a certain pattern or a certain set of patterns. They are beliefs, which are just thoughts we keep thinking, that keep running in the background. And so the backbeat of our operating system that direct us, whether we are aware of it or not. There's also this treasure trove of information in our subconscious or unconscious, where if I ask Trish, what's the most important thing there for her, she's going to make a connection right away because there's something in her subconscious or unconscious that needs to be pulled out. And so that her brain can make that connection quickly. This is kind of a tricky thing because intuition is connected to that system, but it is also, if we allow the intuition, if we allow our higher and highest selves to come into play with our subconscious and our unconscious thinking, we can actually access much more information and many more resources within us and outside of us and our energy that can give us more, can help us tap into a greater wisdom. So what's an example of that? We might look at then the resistance as, if I went through with Trish and looked at all of her resistance sort of subconsciously or unconsciously, and then we determined it really wasn't a conscious or subconscious resistance, but really there was something that was holding her back energetically beyond that system. What could that be? Well, then we might look at where her energy leadership is engaged. And So the framework that I come from is called energy leadership, and it is all about, or core energy, it's all about how we engage different facets of energy for our life, our decision-making, our relationships, and in leadership and how we show up. So specifically, I want to talk about level 7 today, which is the highest level of energy. And it is the level of absolute passion. It is a level in which we engage our intuition in a way that where we get out of the way. And in fact, it's sort of like engaging by allowing. We are become the vessel or the channel for this absolute passion, which is another way of saying our highest selves. We become the conduit for this passion to express itself here in this earthly plane. Yeah. So when we are in a leadership position and we are in our most pure energetic self, we are channeling this sense of purpose, this passion, this our soul work. And that is where our intuition gets to play so much, has so much fun there. So I would imagine that I would love to hear, Trish, maybe you could have an insight on this too, maybe ask you how this is playing out and not retaining the information. How is that then affecting your work? And if you don't want to talk about it publicly, that's okay too. If you want to reach out to me privately, but how is it affecting your work? And then how does it affect the rest of your day? How does it affect your relationships? How does it affect your going about your business and your life and your relationship with yourself, right? Again, we cannot actually segment these things out. We think we can. We can sort of put them in a box for a while. Some people are better at this than others, but ultimately they're going to creep in. And I say they come out sideways. I see this with my kids a lot, right? They get upset about something. They don't want to show it, so it comes out sideways. They have a tantrum, or they act out, or they do something they're not supposed to do, and then they ultimately say, "It's because I'm upset about whatever it is." So where has resistance or ignoring your intuition, ignoring that little voice inside of you, where has that become problematic for you? And if you have a thought about that, I would love to see that in the comments too. I can tell you an example for me. I was in a relationship in my college years where I had a gut about the person I was with. I had a gut feeling, and I'll use those kind of interchangeably. They're probably, and I'm not a super expert on this, so they probably aren't totally interchangeable, but I will tell you that it manifests for me in my gut here, my belly, and also this sort of like inner voice that talks, right? Not like voices necessarily, but just sort of this, really? You really sure you want to do that? So I had this gut feeling of that this guy it was not a healthy relationship, and that it was ending and unraveling. And I didn't want to let it unravel because I was terrified of it, letting go of it. And it ultimately ended really badly and had lifelong repercussions on my soul and my body, which ultimately turned out to be great. But it took me years and years to figure that out. And it was an incredibly traumatic ending for me of that relationship. And I knew it ahead of time, and I could have circumnavigated it or ended it more gracefully, and I didn't. And that's a great example of when I ignored my intuition. So Trish says, I'm going to bring this up, if that's okay with you, Trish. She says, well, I'm new to the job, and I was just told my new boss that she's concerned and is going to try a new training way with me that I completely appreciate. I just don't learn things as quickly as some, and my confidence is pretty much destroyed right now. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for sharing that, Trish. I really appreciate it. And a couple of things I will say to that. One is the good news is they're communicating with you, right? Your boss told you that she's going to try something new. So that means that she's invested in you and keeping you around. She values you enough to say, hey, I'm going to put some energy and some resources forth to support you. So that's really good news. They could just say, you know what, it's not working out. And the next thing is, what can you, and your confidence is tough, right? Because that really is something that I see so much in my clients. And confidence is really about ego. And that's a hard thing to swallow too, because we don't want to think of it that way. But it's really about feeling like there's something about ourselves, our physical body, our physical manifestation of where we are today that is incompetent or not worthy, or whatever that sort of message is. And that can be an energy block that you and I can talk about, Trish. I'm going to ask you a question. What would happen if you were to let go of the judgment of this scenario? So judgment meaning putting a value judgment on it, having a good or bad value. What if it just was? And once you let go of the judgment, what if you could accept it as just being what it is? That's a lot harder to do than it sounds. But if that were available to you, Trish, what would be possible for you? What would be possible for you if you could let go of the judgment of this being a good or bad scenario, of you being good or bad in it? And if you could accept that the feedback just is, you can take it for what it's worth, and then you can turn it into an opportunity to grow. Now that all sounds very like coachy and like, that's really nice, Merritt, but actually this really feels terrible. I hate it. It feels sucks. And I feel like you said your confidence is pretty much shot. Destroyed. In fact, you used the word destroyed. So I totally get that. And I'm not saying that it's as simple as that. I'm just going to ask you to consider what would be possible or what would be different if you could let go of the judgment of being good or bad. And if you could just, if just is not, that's not the right word. If you could allow acceptance around it. Kat Cole, who is a world-renowned CEO, particularly known because she was very young when she became a CEO, and she and she's a young female. So I think she's a little bit older than me now. She might be maybe in the late 40s, maybe hitting 50 now, maybe. But she was a very high muckety muck in a food brand. I think it was Cinnabon, I believe. And she became very successful very early. And one of the things she says, which I really appreciate, is that every time I get feedback, I allow it to be true for at least a minute and consider, what if it's true for at least a minute? And then I think, okay, if it's true, what can I learn from it? And then I can say, if it is, what part of it is true, what part isn't true, what can I let go of? And looking at it in terms of it, what that does is it soothes the defense, right? Okay, so if I'm out of the way, if my confidence is not a factor, if my ego is not a factor, again, a lot harder said than done than said, but if it's true for a moment, what does my intuition tell me about this that makes it true for me or not? Because obviously feedback is always about the other person as well, right? And what they expect, what they need from you, even if it's in your best interest. And then what isn't, and what can I let go of? So Trish says she likes that. All right. The next thing I want to say before we wrap up today, and thank you so much, Trish, for participating. Thanks for playing today. I appreciate it so much that you're showing up here. It's so good to see you and talk to you even virtually. We've known each other for a long time, 20 years, actually, I think, or close to it. Yeah, almost 20 years. So I appreciate you and I love you. Thank you for showing up here today. Okay, I wanted to mention just briefly today that, and actually it was so interesting because when I started thinking about how can I reconnect with my intuition, I had a post that came back in my memories this week that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And sure enough, that happened this week. I'm in an amazing mastermind group with a guy named Alok, and he's a super, super wonderful coach, and that I've been involved with for few months now. And in that group, I've also met this amazing, so many wonderful people, and some of whom I'm going to ask to come on to the show in a little bit. Oh, good. Well, let's talk, Trish. Let's talk about it. She says she's serious about hiring me. That's wonderful. Let's talk. So my teacher appeared in this class. Well, first of all, Alok appeared when I was ready for that. And so as soon as he showed up in my feed, I was like, oh, this is the guy. So that was one thing. And it's been an incredible experience. Number two, Janice. And I'm going to say her name is Noah Hulani. I hope I was saying that right. Janice is a shamanic love coach. She is an incredible intuitive healer. And I just adore her. And when I first met her, we're talking about what each other does. And she goes, I look into people's souls. And I was like, oh, yes, I want her to look into my soul. And so I asked her to do a trade. And I'm telling you guys, she has absolutely, in the better part of 2 weeks, changed my life. So I'm not saying that you all need to go find a shaman and love coach. Although if you're looking for somebody like Janice, please go check her out. I'll put her URL in the comments. But whatever it is that you're looking for, maybe it's an executive leadership coach who understands the power of intuition and passion and soul work and soul purpose, like me. There are many of us out there, so it doesn't have to be just me. Whether it's somebody who you need to find a specific skill set with, maybe you need to get trained on a specific set of skills. Maybe it is, maybe you've always had a curiosity about learning a language or learning an instrument, or maybe something kind of very specific, and you're not sure about wanting to start that. Or maybe it's looking to make a transition into a new line of work or job, or starting a family, whatever it is. When you get specific about your intention, allow your intuition to guide you to the right teacher. We all can teach each other in some ways. We all have wisdom to share. Some of us share it through our professions. Some of us share it just through mentoring. Some of us share it in our own work life. Some of us share it through other kinds of relationships. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So what are you ready for? I would love to hear about what you're ready for. What is your intuition calling you to do? And how does that apply to your leadership? Ultimately, for me, it's this. Intuition, in terms of absolute passion, drives soul work. It tells you when you're in line with your soul work and when you are not. It shows us this through our emotional experience. It shows us this through different relationships that are confronting us. It shows us this through feedback, whether it's wanted or not. It shows us this through circumstances that confront us as well. If something feels like it's super hard and not worth it, it probably isn't. Now, it doesn't mean if it feels like it's super hard and it is worth it, or you're questioning whether it's worth it, that's a place where your intuition needs to kick in and let you know if it is or not. But if you're swimming upstream and you feel like you can't get around this thing, no matter how hard you try, it might be time to reconsider your purpose, your tactics, your approach, and maybe even the container that you're in. Allow that intuition to guide you. One last thing I wanted to say about this was the difference between impulsivity and intuition. So being impulsive is acting without thinking, right? As we get more in tune with our intuition, we can become more trusting of our intuition and act on the intuition and understand that that is where it's coming from. But impulsivity for the sake of impulsivity is not the same thing as intuitive action. So if you are still working with your intuitive action process, if you still are looking to connect with it and are just learning how to understand it, how to trust it, take time. Take time. Get really quiet. If meditation works for you, prayer works for you, that's wonderful. It's a great place to engage this. If it's about taking a run or a walk, going out in nature, those are all places where our intuition is, we can allow it in a safe space to connect with us. This might seem very simplistic, but it is, at the end of the day, the difference between following your soul work and not. So the clearer you are on that little voice, the clearer you are on how opening your channel in a safe way, the easier it will get and the quicker it will get. But be careful about impulsivity versus intuitive action. Impulsivity is based usually on a reactive sense, a sense of wanting to pull away from, run away from, react to in a way that feels gross or yucky or angry or scared. That's impulsivity. Intuitive action is guided by your higher self, by your soul, by your heart, however you want to say that. So I am so curious to know where your intuition is guiding you in your leadership roles, in your life, in your relationships. The most powerful leaders in the world are intuitive leaders. They are not the ones that keep their mess at the door. They're going to put the air quotes again today. They are the ones that are connected to their intuition. They follow that gut instinct. And they do it with heart, and they do it with clarity. They may not always they sometimes might make mistakes, but mistakes are also learning opportunities, right? So drop me a comment here. Even if you're catching it on the replay, I would love to see that. Send me a DM. I would love to see that as well. Talk to me about your intuition and where it's playing a role for you in leadership and in life. I'm going to wrap this up today. It's 10:30. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Trish, especially for participating and sharing your heart. I really, really, really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon about starting an engagement together. That would be awesome. And yeah, come check me out at masterofonecoaching.com. If you want more information, you can sign up for my leadership journal there, my 7-day free leadership journal. Get on my list, and I'll see you on the flip side, y'all. Oh, and stay tuned next week. It's going to have an amazing guest. Cheers.